Sarah Whitmore had lived on the edge of the frontier for 3 years, ever since her husband passed away from illness. Life in the countryside was not easy, but she had learned to manage her small cabin and the land around it with patience and steady effort. Every day began early for her, long before the sky brightened. She fed the chickens, checked the small vegetable patch, and gathered wood for the stove. She had grown used to the peaceful silence that surrounded her home, the quiet broken only by wind in the trees or the chirping of birds. On one particular evening, dark clouds began to move across the sky. The wind carried a cooler touch, and Sarah knew a storm was coming. She stepped outside, wanting to bring in a little more firewood before the rain made everything wet. The air smelled of pine and earth, familiar and calming. But as she walked toward the tree line, something didn't feel quite right. It wasn't fear, just a sense that the forest was unusually still. She paused, listening. There was no birdsong, no rustling, no small animals moving through the leaves. She raised the lantern in her hand a little higher. The light flickered as the wind brushed past it. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. Near the shadowy edge of the woods, something was lying on the ground. It didn't look like a fallen branch. It didn't look like an animal either. Her heart quickened, though she didn't know why. She walked closer. Step by step, the lantern swinging gently from her hand. Then she saw him clearly, a man lying very still. He was a native man, wearing traditional clothing, his skin pale from exhaustion. His breathing was shallow, but he was alive. His eyes were closed, and Sarah could tell he had been there for some time. She didn't know how he ended up so far from his people or why he was alone. She knew only one thing. He needed help. For a moment, she stood frozen. She had heard stories from other settlers, stories filled with warnings. Don't get involved. Keep your distance. Stay on your land. But these stories had always bothered her. She believed people were people, no matter where they came from. And now, staring at the man on the ground, she felt her heart tug in the direction of kindness rather than fear. She knelt beside him and gently touched his shoulder. His skin felt cool. He didn't respond. Sarah whispered, "Sir, can you hear me?" A gust of wind made the trees sway, and a few drops of rain fell onto her face. She knew she couldn't leave him outside. If the storm grew stronger, he might not survive the cold night. She looked back toward her cabin. It wasn't far, but carrying him alone would be difficult. Still, she couldn't walk away. She placed her lantern on the ground and tried to lift him, first pulling one of his arms over her shoulder. He was heavier than he looked, but she gathered her strength, pushing steady breaths through her lungs. Inch by inch, she helped him stand enough for her to support his weight. He was unable to walk, but he leaned against her slightly, making it easier than she expected. Their slow progress through the clearing felt endless. The man's head rested lightly against her shoulder, and she balanced both his weight and the lantern as she guided him toward the cabin door. Once inside, she lowered him carefully onto her small bed. Rain began tapping against the windows as she worked, the storm slowly gathering strength. Sarah closed the door and took a moment to catch her breath. She then lit another candle and placed it beside the bed. The warm glow made the man's face more visible. His features were sharp but peaceful. She noticed marks on his clothing, signs of a difficult journey, but nothing dangerous or threatening. It was clear he had struggled against nature, not against another person. She fetched a bowl of clean water, a cloth, and some herbs she kept for treating sickness. These herbs weren't strong medicine, but they helped with fever and weakness. Her hands were gentle as she moistened the cloth and pressed it to his forehead. His skin warmed slowly as the minutes passed. The storm outside grew louder. Thunder echoed through the valley, and the cabin walls seemed to shiver each time the sky flashed with light. But inside, everything felt calm. Sarah kept wiping his face and checking his breathing. She whispered softly, unsure whether he could hear her. "You're safe here. Rest. Everything will be all right." She wasn't sure why she said it, but the words comforted her too. After some time, the man stirred. His eyelids fluttered, opening just for a moment before closing again. Sarah saw his eyes, dark, thoughtful, full of quiet strength even in weakness. He didn't speak. She didn't expect him to. She simply continued caring for him, giving him small sips of water whenever he could swallow. Hours passed. The storm moved closer, rain pounding against the roof. Sarah stayed awake despite her weariness. She didn't want him to wake up alone and frightened. She imagined how she would feel if she had collapsed far from home and opened her eyes in a stranger's house. She wanted him to feel safe, not afraid. As she watched over him, pieces of her own life drifted through her mind. She remembered her husband, who had always believed in helping others. He had once said to her, "A person's character is not measured by who they know, but by how they treat those who have nothing to give in return." Those words felt close to her heart now. Sarah glanced at the man again. His breathing had grown stronger, though he still looked very tired. She wondered who he was. A traveler? A hunter? Someone important in his community? She didn't know, and it didn't matter tonight. All that mattered was that he needed help. She heated a little broth on the stove and brought it to him. When he woke slightly, she lifted the spoon to his lips. He managed a few small tastes before drifting back into sleep. She noticed a calmness settle over his expression, as if his body was finally easing into rest. The storm continued outside, but Sarah felt warm inside, knowing he was no longer out in the cold. She pulled a blanket over him, making sure he was comfortable. Then she sat on the small wooden chair near her bed, listening to the rain and watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. Hours seemed to blend together. The candle burned low. The wind slowly softened. Sarah's eyes grew heavy, but she didn't allow herself to sleep deeply. Every so often, she checked on him, making sure he was breathing well and not too warm or too cold. Near dawn, the storm had passed. The sky outside began to lighten. Sarah stepped out for a moment to breathe the fresh morning air. The world smelled clean after the rain. Drops of water hung on the leaves like tiny pearls. The quiet morning wrapped around her cabin gently. When she returned inside, she saw the man was awake, fully awake this time. His eyes followed her movements, calm but cautious. He tried to sit up, and she quickly supported his back with a careful hand. He looked at her with deep gratitude, even though he seemed unsure how to express it. He didn't speak English, but she didn't need words to understand what he meant. She simply smiled softly and offered him more water. He accepted it with a slight nod. There was no fear between them, only a quiet understanding. Though Sarah did not know it yet, her decision to help him made in a moment of compassion under a stormy sky would change her life in ways she could not imagine. She had simply acted on kindness, believing it was the right thing to do. She did not expect anything in return. She certainly did not expect what would happen the next day. But for now, in the peaceful morning light, all she knew was that the stranger she had helped was safe, alive, and slowly beginning to regain his strength. And in that moment, that was enough. Sarah woke early, the soft morning light filtering gently through the curtain. She felt the stiffness in her back from sleeping in the wooden chair beside the bed, but she didn't mind. Her first thought was of the man she had brought inside the night before. She turned her head and saw him lying quietly, eyes closed, breathing steady and calm. He looked much better than he had when she first found him. She stood up slowly, stretching her tired arms, and walked to the stove to start warming water. She wanted to make a bit of tea for herself and something gentle for him to drink too. As she moved around the small cabin, she tried not to make much noise. She didn't want to startle him or make him feel uncomfortable. When she glanced back again, she saw his eyes open. He wasn't moving much, but he was definitely awake. His gaze followed her, curious and watchful. It was clear he was trying to understand where he was and what had happened. Sarah offered a small, gentle smile. "Good morning," she said softly, even though she knew he might not understand the words. She believed that tone and kindness could speak more strongly than language. She pointed lightly toward the bowl of warm water she carried, and then toward him, making simple gestures. He watched her hands, then nodded faintly to show he understood. He tried to sit up, and Sarah hurried to help him, placing a pillow behind his back so he could lean comfortably. He sipped the water carefully, his hands steady despite his weakness. His clothing was still damp from the night before, and Sarah made a mental note to dry them near the fire while he rested. As he drank, he looked around the cabin. His eyes lingered on simple things: a woven basket, the wooden table, the old rocking chair by the window. He seemed to be taking in every detail, perhaps trying to judge whether this place was safe. Sarah understood his caution. If the roles had been reversed, she too would be unsure in a stranger's home. When he finished the water, he lowered the bowl and tried to speak, but his voice was too weak. He placed a hand on his chest, then touched his forehead, then motioned quietly toward the door, as if trying to explain something important. Sarah watched his gestures carefully, trying her best to understand. But she didn't want him to strain himself. She gently shook her head and raised her hand in a calm, steady gesture, asking him to rest. He seemed unsure at first, but eventually relaxed again, letting his head sink back against the pillow. For the next several hours, Sarah moved around the cabin, doing her morning tasks while still keeping an eye on him. She washed a few dishes, tidied the table, and stepped outside briefly to check on the chickens. Every time she returned inside, she found him watching her with quiet curiosity. His expression had changed from cautious to something gentler, something like gratitude. When she brought him a small bowl of warm broth, he accepted it with both hands, almost as if it were a gift rather than a simple meal. He tasted it carefully, and Sarah noticed his expression soften. He nodded, pointing at the bowl as if to say it was good. Sarah smiled again, her eyes warm. She was relieved he had enough strength to eat. They had no shared language, but sometimes silence can carry meaning more clearly than words. By midday, he tried again to sit up without her help. This time, he succeeded, though it was clear that his body still felt heavy. He looked toward the door several times, and Sarah realized he wanted to step outside or at least see where he was. She didn't want him to push himself too hard, but she also didn't want to make him feel trapped. She stepped toward the door and slowly opened it, letting a gentle stream of fresh air drift inside. The sky was bright, painted with soft clouds, and the earth still smelled fresh after last night's storm. When she turned back to him, she smiled and motioned that he could look if he wanted. He nodded gratefully. Sarah helped him stand, supporting most of his weight at first. His steps were slow and careful, but steady. Together, they walked the few steps to the doorway. When he looked out at the clearing, the open land, the tall pine trees, the quiet morning, something peaceful settled over his face. He took a deep breath, as if the fresh air helped him feel more himself. For a moment, they stood side by side, looking out into the calm landscape. Sarah felt a sense of connection in that moment, even though they barely knew anything about each other. Some connections don't need conversations, they grow in shared silence, shared trust, and shared human kindness. After a few minutes, she guided him back inside before he grew too tired. He didn't resist. He seemed to understand she wanted to help him and was beginning to trust her. As the afternoon passed, Sarah worked on drying his clothing by the fire. While she did that, she noticed him watching her hands carefully, almost studying the way she worked. She wondered what he must be thinking. Perhaps he was surprised at her kindness. Perhaps he was trying to understand her world just as she was trying to respect his. Once his clothes were dry, she folded them neatly and placed them on the chair beside the bed. He nodded when he saw them, a soft smile in his eyes. She wasn't sure if he would stay long enough to wear them again today, but she wanted him to have the choice. Later, when he had gathered enough strength, he tried to communicate again. He touched his chest lightly and said a single word in his own language. Sarah listened carefully, though she didn't know the meaning. He repeated it, slower this time, and pointed to himself. She realized he was telling her his name. She repeated the word quietly, and he nodded with approval. He then pointed gently toward her. Sarah placed a hand on her chest and said, "Sarah." He tried to repeat her name, and though his pronunciation was different, it made her smile. They both laughed softly, a moment of warm understanding passing between them. Throughout the rest of the day, they found small ways to communicate. He pointed at objects, asking their names in English. She pointed at things too, curious about the words he spoke in return. It was slow, simple, and at times amusing, but they were learning from each other. As the sun began to set, coloring the sky with shades of orange and pink, the man grew restless. He looked toward the forest again and again. Sarah realized he might want to return to his people. She didn't want him to leave before he was ready, but she also understood that he could not stay forever. He motioned toward himself, then toward the door, then toward the trees, creating a gentle sequence with his hands. Sarah understood. He was telling her he needed to go, but when he tried to stand on his own, his legs trembled. Sarah placed a steadying hand on his arm, shaking her head gently, urging him to rest one more night. He looked conflicted, torn between the need to go and the fact that his body was not yet ready. After a moment of thinking, he nodded slowly. He would stay one more night. That evening, Sarah made a simple but warm meal. They ate quietly, but the silence felt comfortable, not awkward. The gentle light of the lamps filled the cabin, and the fire crackled softly, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Later, as he rested, Sarah sat near the window, thinking. She wondered where his family was. She wondered if they were searching for him. She wondered if they were worried. She hoped they would find him soon. As she thought about these things, she noticed him looking at her again, his eyes thoughtful. He seemed to be studying her expression, perhaps sensing her concern. After a moment, he placed a hand over his heart and nodded softly, as if to reassure her that things were all right. Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She didn't know why she cared so much, but she did. Night settled gently over the land, quieter than the night before. No storms, no heavy winds, just peaceful darkness and the soft glow of the cabin. Sarah didn't know that this would be the last peaceful night before everything changed. She didn't know that by sunrise, she would wake to the sound of many horses. She didn't know that the kindness she had shown would echo far beyond her little cabin. She only knew that tonight, a stranger had become something more than just someone she helped. He had become part of a story neither of them could yet see. Sarah woke at dawn with a quiet but uneasy feeling in her chest. The air inside the cabin felt different, somehow still, yet expectant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She sat up slowly in her chair and looked toward the bed. The man she had been caring for was awake too. He was already sitting up, his posture straight and thoughtful, as if he sensed something unusual. The soft morning light touched his face gently, showing that much of his strength had returned. His eyes were calm but alert, and he kept glancing toward the window, listening to something far off. Sarah followed his gaze but heard nothing except the soft rustle of leaves outside. She stepped quietly to the stove to warm some water and prepare a small breakfast. She tried to shake off the strange feeling, but it stayed with her like a quiet whisper. Something was coming. She just didn't know what. As she set a small bowl of warm broth on the table, she noticed the man rise carefully from the bed. This time, he stood with more confidence, though he still moved gently. He pointed toward the door and then toward the forest. The expression on his face serious but calm. "You want to leave today?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. He nodded slowly. His eyes said more than his gestures. He seemed grateful for her help, but he also felt a pull to return to where he belonged. Sarah understood that well. Everyone has a home their heart recognizes. Before she could say anything else, he paused. His head turned slightly, and his eyes sharpened with awareness. This time, Sarah heard it too. The distant rhythm of hooves. Very faint at first, soft thumps that grew steadier, then stronger, then unmistakable. The sound traveled through the ground and up into the wooden walls of the cabin, a low vibration that made Sarah's breath catch. She turned to the man, and he turned to her. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air felt heavier now, full of something she couldn't name. Anticipation. Maybe fear. Maybe something else. The hooves grew louder. More than one horse, more than a few, many. Sarah stepped toward the window slowly, and lifted the curtain just enough to see outside. At first, she saw only a line of trees and the soft morning light spreading across the clearing. But then she saw shadows moving between the trunks. Large shapes. Horses. Riders. Her heart tightened. She dropped the curtain quickly and stepped back, trying to calm her breathing. She turned to the man, who was standing completely still, his face unreadable but his eyes sharp with understanding. He placed a hand on his chest, then pointed gently toward the forest. Sarah watched him closely. "Are they your people?" He didn't speak, but his slow nod told her everything. The sound grew louder, closer. Sarah could now hear the soft breathing of the horses, the gentle clinking of something metallic, the shifting of saddles and reins. It was not a sound of anger or hurry. It was simply a group arriving with purpose. But it was a large group. Sarah's hands felt cool, and she pressed them together, trying to steady her nerves. She wasn't afraid of them, she didn't want to be. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply helped a man who needed kindness. But she was alone, one woman in a small cabin, and the thought of so many visitors arriving at once made her heart beat faster. The man stepped toward her and touched his chest gently in a gesture of reassurance. His expression was calm, peaceful even. He looked at her with a softness that said she had nothing to fear. Sarah took a quiet breath and nodded. She trusted him. She hoped she could trust the people he belonged to as well. Then the moment arrived. The ground outside shook more clearly as the horses entered the clearing. Sarah moved to the door and opened it slowly, her breath held without realizing it. She stood in the doorway, her hands slightly trembling, yet her posture steady. Outside, the scene that greeted her was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. Around 30 native warriors formed a wide semicircle in front of her cabin. Their horses stood still, their heads high and calm. The riders sat tall, their expressions serious but not unkind. They wore traditional clothing decorated with beads and patterns that caught the morning light. It was not a threatening sight. It was powerful, dignified, and deeply respectful. In the center of the group, on a slightly larger horse, sat an older man with an air of authority. His presence was calm and steady, like a river that had flowed for many years. Beside him stood a younger warrior, the same man Sarah had cared for. He walked forward slowly, each step measured. His posture was strong now, his balance sure. He stood only a few feet from her, his expression warm and grateful. He looked back at the group, then toward Sarah, as if preparing to introduce two worlds that rarely touched gently. The older man dismounted from his horse with careful movements. He approached Sarah, stopping at a respectful distance. His eyes held depth, wisdom, and a kindness that put a soft ease in her chest. He spoke in his own language first, his voice calm and steady. The man Sarah had cared for stepped beside him and repeated the words in slow, careful English, though his accent was still strong. "He says," the man translated gently, "that he is thankful for you." Sarah blinked, touched, and surprised. She hadn't expected a greeting like this. She had been prepared for worry, confusion, perhaps caution, but gratitude felt like sunlight breaking through the morning mist. The older man spoke again, and his words came with a quiet emotion. When the younger man translated, his voice carried the same calm feeling. "He says that you cared for one who belongs to us. You gave him help when he could not stand. You kept him safe when he was alone. This is something we see. This is something we honor." Sarah felt warmth rise in her eyes. She hadn't done anything for praise. She had simply followed her heart. But hearing these words made her realize how deeply her kindness had reached. The older man gestured to the group. "They came," the younger warrior translated, "because they thought I was lost. They looked for me. And when they learned I lived, they came to thank you." Sarah nodded softly, her voice steady even though her heart was full. "I only did what anyone should do," she said. Though she knew in her heart that not everyone would have done the same, the younger man looked at her with deep sincerity. "You did what many would not," he said gently. "You showed care." My people do not forget things like this. A quiet moment passed between them, peaceful and full of meaning. One by one, the other warriors lowered their heads toward her in a gesture of respect. It wasn't a bow of submission, no. It was something far more meaningful. It was acknowledgement. It was honor. It was gratitude. Sarah's breath caught quietly in her throat. Never had she imagined such a moment. Never had she thought her small act of kindness would bring so many hearts to her doorstep. The younger man then stepped forward, placing a hand over his heart with deep sincerity. His eyes held gratitude, respect, and something almost like friendship. "You saved my life," he said simply. Sarah opened her mouth, unsure what to say. She finally whispered, "I'm glad you're safe." He smiled softly, small, but genuine. Behind him, some of the warriors slowly dismounted and approached the clearing. They carried baskets filled with food, blankets crafted with beautiful patterns, and other offerings that looked meaningful. They placed them gently near Sarah's doorway, each one a quiet message of appreciation. They did not crowd her. They did not overwhelm her home. Every movement they made was calm, controlled, respectful. The moment was not frightening, it was unbelievably peaceful. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching in awe as the morning sun rose higher, touching the land with warm light. For a long time, she had lived alone, unsure if her actions mattered in the large, wild world around her. But now she saw that kindness had reached across boundaries she hadn't even known she crossed. The clearing, once silent and humble, now felt like a sacred place where two worlds had met through compassion, not fear. The man she saved stepped beside her, his expression warm. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we leave. But today, we are here to honor what you did." Sarah nodded, feeling her heart settle fully into the moment. She didn't know what the rest of the day would bring. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Everything had changed, not because of fear or force, but because of kindness. The morning light grew softer as time passed, spreading warmth across the clearing where the 30 visitors stood. Sarah still felt the weight of the moment. But it was no longer a heavy feeling, it was gentle, like a blanket wrapping around her heart. She had never expected her quiet life to lead to something like this. Yet here she was, standing at her doorway with a group of people who had come in peace and gratitude. The younger man she had cared for stood beside her, steady on his feet now. He no longer looked weak or exhausted. Instead, there was a calm strength in his posture, a sense of belonging as he stood among his people again. His eyes still carried kindness when he looked her way, as if he wanted her to know that he remembered every small moment of care she had shown. The older man, who seemed to be the leader, looked around the clearing and then spoke gently, his tone deep but warm. The younger man translated his words with care, making sure Sarah understood each message clearly. "He says," the younger man explained, "that kindness is not forgotten among our people. When someone shows care without asking anything in return, it becomes a story we carry with us. It becomes something that joins two hearts, even if they come from different worlds." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She had always believed in treating others with compassion, but she had never imagined that others would see it as something so meaningful. The older man continued speaking, and again, the younger man translated with careful respect. "He says that my family believed I might not return. When I reached them this morning, they were grateful. They wished to come here themselves and thank the person who gave me help when they could not reach me." Sarah looked at the younger man with surprise. "You went to them this morning?" she asked softly. He nodded, his expression gentle. "Yes, I woke at first light and walked a short distance into the trees. There, my people found me. They were already searching. I told them about you. That is why they came." Sarah's heart warmed. She was glad he had reunited with his family, even though she had not heard him leave earlier. The thought that he had made sure to return with thanks meant more than she could explain. Behind them, a few of the warriors placed more baskets and handmade items near the doorway. The blankets were beautifully woven, each one carrying patterns that held meaning in their culture. Some baskets were filled with fruits, grains, and herbs. Others held small, handcrafted items, simple yet full of care. Each gift was placed gently, never forcefully. Nothing felt overwhelming. It felt like a peaceful exchange of appreciation. The younger man turned to Sarah again. His eyes, full of gratitude, met hers with calm sincerity. "I want you to know," he said softly, "that what you did for me will stay in my heart. My people say that someone who helps another during a time of need becomes a friend, even if they come from different places. Today, we stand here to honor you, because your heart guided your hands." Sarah felt a soft tremble in her chest. She looked around at the 30 people who had come to her small cabin simply because she had chosen to help someone. She had not expected anything like this. She had not even thought about what might happen next after she helped him. She had only done what felt right. Another man stepped forward from the group, holding a small, carved wooden piece in his hand. He placed it gently in Sarah's palms. The carving was simple but elegant, showing a bird with its wings spread in a peaceful gesture. The younger man explained its meaning. "This is a symbol of friendship," he said quietly. "It means that peace has touched this place. It means that you are someone we remember with respect." Sarah held the carving carefully, tracing the smooth lines with her thumb. It felt warm from the man's hands, and its meaning touched her deeply. She looked up at the group and said softly, "Thank you. Truly." The older man nodded, his eyes kind as he watched her. For a few moments, no one spoke. The clearing was quiet except for the gentle movement of leaves in the breeze and the steady breaths of the horses. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was peaceful, full of understanding. The younger man then stepped slightly closer, his expression thoughtful. "I will go with them," he said quietly. "My place is with my people. But I wanted to say something before we leave." Sarah listened, her heart steady but full. "You cared for me with patience and gentleness," he said. "You did not know who I was. You did not know where I came from. But you gave me safety. Because of that, my people and I will always hold respect for this place and the person who lives here." He paused, his eyes softening even more. "If you ever see one of us in the forest, do not be afraid. You have friends there now." Sarah's eyes filled with warmth. She had lived alone for so long. And now suddenly, the world around her felt fuller, kinder, more connected. "I won't forget you," she whispered. He smiled. A small but gentle smile that carried gratitude. Then, he stepped back with the group. The older man spoke once more, and the younger man translated his final message. He says that today is a day of peace, a day of thanks, and a day that will be remembered. Sarah nodded softly, the words settling in her heart like petals falling gently to the earth. Slowly, the group began to prepare to leave. They moved with quiet coordination, mounting their horses with calm and practiced ease. The clearing was filled with a soft rhythm as saddles settled, reins shifted, and the horses breathed the cool morning air. Before the younger man mounted his horse, he turned back one last time. He raised his hand in a gesture of respect, palm forward, fingers relaxed. It was a simple yet meaningful symbol. Sarah raised her hand in return, her expression full of warmth and appreciation. Then, with gentle movement, the group began to ride away. Their horses moved quietly through the clearing, and the sound of hooves softened as they entered the forest. The branches parted to welcome them and then settled again as they passed. Sarah stood at her doorway until the very last figure disappeared among the trees. The morning felt brighter now, touched by something that went beyond sunlight, touched by connection, by understanding, by the quiet beauty of kindness shared. Once they were gone, Sarah looked down at the carving still in her hand. The little bird seemed to carry the spirit of the moment, wings outstretched, as if embracing the world. She stepped back inside her cabin and looked at everything the group had left for her. The blankets, the baskets, the small gifts filled with care. Each item felt like a piece of a story she would remember forever. Her cabin felt different now. Not larger, but more alive, more meaningful. She placed the carved bird on her table where the morning light touched it gently. She felt a deep sense of peace settle in her heart. She thought about the man she had helped, about the trust that had grown between them without a single shared language, and about the kindness that had traveled from her small cabin into the hearts of many. Sarah had lived alone for years, believing her life was quiet and simple. But today showed her something she had never expected. Even the smallest act of care could open a doorway between two different worlds. Even the quietest heart could create a lasting connection, and even a single moment of compassion could echo far beyond the place where it first began. Sarah sat near the window, watching the sunlight dance through the trees. She felt no fear about the future, only gratitude. She had not set out to make history or change anything. She had only followed her heart, and that simple act had brought peace to her door. She smiled softly to herself, knowing that kindness, once given, never truly disappears. It travels, it grows, and it touches lives in ways no one can predict. Her life would go on as before, quiet, steady, and peaceful, but she would carry this day in her heart forever. And she knew that somewhere beyond the trees, a group of people carried her kindness with them as well. The world, though vast and different, had become just a little closer, just because she chose to care.